Stock sectors, oil and gas stocks for September 23rd, 2024. This is Arvi. So obviously, as Slim highlighted in Market Week this past Friday, we are looking for inflation to start to rear its head once again in the marketplace, and that would manifest as rising input cost prices. For staples, for instance, as we're seeing ags have a pop, we're seeing softs get a pop back to the upside, and also actually in oil, very likely, as we have. Some bottoming action, let's just call it that much, in the S&P oil and gas ETF, which is the XOP. What's interesting and I think important about this overall cycle analysis that you will see is that we're also now seeing a shift in bias in the MCM on the short-term time frame. That is important to note because again, everything can only be confirmed if we see a shift in price, and the MCM is like literally having thousands of eyes across many different stocks, so that way you can monitor for shifts in bias. And actually, if you are a level 4 member or higher, you can get notified of when there are shifts in bias, which is really quite helpful. So with that, what we're going to do here is we're going to look at the XOP and then five of its holdings. They're all right around 3% weighting here, so it is not a highly concentrated ETF. And then we will also see what the bias is currently saying on both the short term and the intermediate term time frame for the underlines that we're going to talk about here. So let's first start out with the XOP weekly and daily cycle analysis first. Okay, so this is our both weekly and daily cycle analysis for the S&P oil and gas ETF, or the XOP. As I said in the opener, they're all right around 3% weightings. But what I think is important about this is we have this old cycle trough right there and a cycle low support at 126.59. You will see we tried there. We had a rally attempt that then failed and then got one more hit down. And now you can see we have left a morning star pattern on the weekly bar. In my opinion, it is very important to only look at the weekly bars once they actually close, right? Because obviously anything can happen during the week, and then once they finally close, you get a clear pattern off of that. And just like back here, you can see a very long hammer that formed. Then we tried back towards that low, couldn't, and then formed the bottom. That was an obvious hammer on the weekly, and that did have clear influence in terms of that bottoming timing that did obviously form there. Here we have a Morningstar pattern. This action looks a lot like this action back here in the XOP, where we tried to form a low, got one more hit, looked through the low, failed to get lower versus that low right there at 128.33. And then you can see a test and then a trap that got set there for a move back up. Here, watch that low very closely. That low here is at 127.75. You can see we have had now two bars where it has tried to have a weekly bar below. It couldn't, so that could be setting a trap very similar to that period right here. Now, obviously, we have to just watch to see what kind of up move we can get. But in terms of time, the time is right for a bottom to form here and for this to turn back up. On the upside, we have a zone from 141 to 149 or so in the XOP on the intermediate term. On the daily, you can see that there is a trough that is due here. Very nice selling into the low. Again, this is a theme here. Look at the sharp price action down into the trough. Obviously, this is quite muted, but that was off of a key intermediate term trough. Look back here, very sharp, right? So this is really how a short-term trough at the minimum should form. And in this case, also, in my opinion, likely an intermediate term trough. We now have a very subtle turn up in the slim ribbon back to neutral. So that is positive. And what I'm looking for is to see if this can hold here on the downside, that right around 132.5 to 128.75 area. And if this can put in a little flag, I'm going to be looking back to the long side for a trade idea for level 3 and 4 members. So this is certainly on radar. So now let's go ahead and pop over the MCM here. And what I'm going to do is first go to intermediate term. And this is really easy. Go ahead and type in the symbol XOP. So it's neutral now for the first time. And you can see on Friday it changed right near the close to neutral. And on the short term, we're turning bullish. Okay, so that is something to note there. If we go ahead and jump over to the next one we're going to look at, let's see EOG resources. Okay, so this is EOG. And what we're going to do is look at the weekly chart. Very nice action in EOG. Look at how it tried to move through that old swing low there. Just again, a recent swing low, not a dominant low. Couldn't, then again left a clear tail and now a nice bull bar. So this is raising the odds that you're seeing a bottoming phase here in the EOG resources. Trough that is due 819 to 1111. 61.8, which should be quite easy on the upside if this is in fact a bottom at 130.24, and I'll be looking for a move towards the 78.6, which is basically right where that old swing high was, and that's at 134.70-ish here in EOG. So again, if it moves through that level, then obviously we have this old high here at 139.67, always level to level, but on a longer time frame, you can see this is just basically, just basically building energy here for possibly a more significant breakout in time. Now, I'm not really looking for that yet, as we haven't seen enough price action to really say, okay, this may have this old high in play at 146.80-ish. It's got a lot of work to do to say that would be in play. Obviously, we have to move through the 78.6, then this old high, right? So on and so forth. But an interesting longer-term pattern setting up there. On the daily chart, what I like about this is just like what we saw in the XOP, a nice turn up to neutral, a very sharp sell into the low, a hammer on the low that did mark the low. And then we saw a nice turn up here in EOG resources. Now I've added in minor fibs here, 124.34 to 122.67, watching to see if it can hold that area. There's a minor 78.6 at 121.66. If it loses that, I would get a bit more concerned here in the short term, but ideally I'd like to see a little flag form and then set up for higher, very similar to what happened back here. That was a really clean setup if you draw on your fibs off that low, perfectly off that 38.2 to the 61.8 zone, right? So this is a reasonable long setup there. You can see the bull signal on the PO, and then look at those white bars off of the low as well. Very nice, and that led to a really clean move. That is really what I'm looking for our trade ideas services. Is just really simple. Let's just call it about 1 to 1.5 week-ish kind of holds for a quick move back in my direction, of course. In terms of the levels up, you can see that there's a 61.8 at a 61.8. Let's see that clearly at 127.50 and a 78.6 at 130.60. We jump over to the next one. Let's just go back to the XOP for a second. We're going to look at XOM. XOM is interesting here. Also has a trough that is due here 9.2 to 11.4 or so. What I like about this structurally is that it's holding in that top third of range overall right now. So just zoom out for a second. This is looking quite positive. There's really no reason to be structurally bearish on this. We have had now multiple tries, interestingly, versus right around that 1975-ish area. If it tries through there, we would look for it to actually break out over that on this next move up, and then likely easily move through 123.75. So this is a very structurally positive look here in XOM, and going to be watching for this to turn up with a little bit more power. Again, not quite yet. Right now we're just playing a higher low setup, but we'll be watching to see if it can hold 113.90 to 111.53. There's a 78.6 at 117.67 to 120.50. So watch for that higher low flag setup. This was a little bit deeper than I would have liked to see, but you can see if you draw your fibs, and it didn't do any violations here. It did not close below that 78.6. It saved itself. This is a little deeper than I would have liked, but you can see it did form that low and then give you a solid pop back up. So gonna have to see how this one acts. This needs to be moved just pinch down. Let's take a look at the actual levels here. 113.83 to 111.52. 78.6 down there at 109.87. If this pullback wants to be a bit deeper, I don't really think it will be, but obviously we just have to watch to see. I'm going to be watching for a flag and then for this to turn back up towards the 78.6 at 117.67 and 120.50. So an interesting setup there. Let's go over to the next one. We'll look at Chevron. Chevron is much weaker than Exxon, obviously, right now. There is, however, a trough due. You do have a clear morning star as well, as it tried to move through that low from the prior cycle low support at 139.62 and couldn't. So that's certainly notable. A trough 812 to 1028. And you can see our levels here. There's a 50 to the 61.8 from 151 to right on 155 or so. 78.6 at 160.35. So be watching for this to get a pop back up. While this is technically a lower low, really looking more at this as a neutral cycle structure versus anything super bearish, as this is not really a very obvious lower low. If we jump over to the daily, um, if we see here, you can see that there's a 38.2 to the 61.8, 144 to 142.50, a minor 78.6 at 141.14. I'm going to be watching for this to curl back up towards the 146.50 to 149.80. 149.80 should be doable here if this is going to be a flag. I would be looking for a long setup for a move back towards 150. Again, a loss of that minor 78.6 would be negative. And you can see what that risk would be like here. Talking about a risk right on 270 to target about $6 or so on the upside. So that's solid. And you can see that we just had an opening here in the market as well. And if we go ahead and jump over to the next one, I want to highlight, just looking at the list here, I want to highlight VLO last. Okay, so this is Valero. Again, this is obviously triggered towards gasoline, which is still in a bearish mode. I'm not seeing anything positive yet in VLO. In fact, I would like to be on the short side here. There's a trough that is due 11.4 to 12.23. We have a left-hand translation where rallies have in fact backed off, and we are still looking for that to be the case until we trade down to that cycle low timing, which is due again 10.28 to 12.23. As I said, 126.40, and then you have this old trough right around 119.98. Let's just call it 120. That would be the downside target here on the intermediate term in VLO. Okay, so not a good look. On the daily chart, you can see here in VLO, there was a short-term trough due. We tried higher. We filled right at that slim ribbon. I'll be watching to see if this can get a little uptick again, and then look to get back on the short side here. That next daily trough is not due until mid-November. You can see obviously all three EMAs in parallel. We just got a bearish signal on the PO. Now let's go ahead and hop over to the MCM. We'll show you some of the biases on the underlyings we highlighted. Obviously, we still have bull biases here in both the SPY, QQQ, as well as the IWMs. Let's go ahead and hop over to XOM. We'll look at the intermediate term first. It's neutral. Let's go to short term. It's neutral. So that just says wait, basically in terms of the bias. Intermediate term, neutral. Short term, bullish. MRO is not on here. Let's go ahead to look at VLO. VLO on the intermediate term is bearish, so that has work to do, and we are bearish in terms of our bias on the intermediate term, and short term is also bearish. So you can see in terms of our cycle analysis, in addition to our momentum work, it's all lining up to the downside. So that says rallies are very likely to fail there in VLO as well. Now, keep in mind, we have a list of now over 140 plus stocks on this list for the MCM. So it's a very comprehensive list. It is not going to have every stock. It's going to have most of the ones we follow. So you can see just a very nice list of underlines, and we're going to continue to improve the system over time and, make it a system that every single day you're going to want to go to, and you're going to want to track the biases on different underlines that you are focused on, because it's really important to watch that bias shift and know and have a clear process that tells you, okay, my trade is working or my trade isn't working, right? And the MCM can be that confirming tool for you. Okay, so that's our look there at the stock sectors video for today. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out. Thanks again, and have a great day.